In any mystery game, you need some parts of the game to be unpredictable. Danganronpa has many unpredictable moments, and I think the games get more unpredictable as they go on. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is mostly predictable in terms of its killers. I think the only one that's hard to figure out is Mondo, but the unpredictability comes from the story itself. Things such as the mastermind attempting to kill Makoto in his room, Makoto's execution, the mastermind hitting us across the back of the head, and confiscating all the info in the secret room. Most of the unpredictability comes from the back and forth fight between the mastermind and the students. Danganronpa 2 becomes a bit more unpredictable. Again, the killers are still mostly predictable, but they get a little bit harder compared to 1. In my opinion, the only one that's really hard to predict in this one is Chiaki, but there are also a lot of story moments that you will never see coming. Nekomaru's sacrifice and him turning into a robot, Fuyuhiko getting cut in the execution, and then stabbing himself in the stomach later on, Nagito blowing up a part of the island. Then we get to V3. And the more and more I start thinking about V3, the more I realize how unpredictable it really was. And that's gonna be the focus on today's video. It's why V3 was the most unpredictable game for me. And don't worry, I'm not even gonna bring up chapter 6 that much. Yes, that's the most unpredictable ending, but I want to focus mostly on chapter 1 to 5. Let's focus on the culprits first. Now I know I said the culprits in 1 and 2 are pretty predictable, but I'll be honest with you, I have no business making that claim. Just to give you some context, I remember getting fooled by case 4 in the first game, when suicide is actually one of the most obvious options, and I also got fooled by the second case in the second game, where they literally give you a single piece of evidence that exposes the killer right away. But I was a dumb kid, and I wasn't really looking at the evidence too hard, and a lot of the time I was just going off who sounded suspicious. But in hindsight, I can see why these killers are really obvious. Now let's look at V3. Case 1, they kill off the protag. Now in terms of V3 cases, I actually thought this was more on the predictable side, just because they showed all the setup, which is good, they should show how Kaede set everything up, but because they showed that, I knew something was very off. But still, killing off the protag in case 1, that's insane. Oh yeah, and even if you managed to guess this correctly, Kaede actually wasn't the killer, but you know, that's chapter 6 stuff, and I said I wouldn't mention chapter 6 too much. Then we got case 2. The only thing incriminating Kurumi is the black piece of cloth. Now I don't know about you guys, but right away I thought this was Ryoma's. But what makes this case really unpredictable is the trial. For whatever reason, I remember thinking Angie did this one, but even if you came into this trial thinking Kurumi did it, they call out Kurumi in this trial near the beginning. The reason why this makes the trial unpredictable is because they never do this in Danganronpa. Usually if the characters say that person X is probably the culprit in the investigation or early in the trial, person X will not be the culprit. In case 2, they break this trend and Kurumi ends up being the killer anyway. And now we're going to the infamous case 3. This one's so predictable, right? It's why a lot of people hate this case because the culprit is so obvious. Well, I'm gonna make a confession, and I'll be honest, it wasn't obvious to me. You're probably wondering how this wasn't obvious, and let me try to explain why this fooled me so much. The reason why I didn't suspect Korekiyo was because he was too obvious. Like, this guy stares at you and he's basically saying, hey guys, look, I'm the killer, I did it. Yeah, I killed Angie and Tenko. But once he stops acting a little bit suspicious in the beginning, he's also very calm. And he starts asking Monokuma about what happens if there are 2 killers. So here I'm thinking, oh my god, he killed Tenko, and someone else killed Angie, and now he got away with his crime. I was convinced because all the evidence pointed to this guy, and he was acting suspicious. Despite that, the mad lad Kodaka actually made this guy the culprit. And you guys might be wondering, what's the difference between someone like Korekiyo and Celeste? Why was Celeste so obvious to pinpoint as the killer and Korekiyo not so much? Well, with Celeste's case, they went through the investigation and most of the trial with the assumption that Celeste had an alibi for the murders. With this knowledge, no one really thought of Celeste as a possible Blackened, and no one was suspicious of her during the investigation during the game. In the Korekiyo case, Korekiyo is never ruled out as a suspect. Miyu accuses him very early on in the trial, similar to what happens in Kurumi's case. And I swear Miyu wasn't even the only one. I think Kokichi also said Kyo was the culprit. But not only that, we literally have a scrum debate where we are arguing that Korekiyo did not kill Angie. That's right, we were defending this guy in the trial as the ultimate detective, only to accuse him right after. When has this ever happened in a case where everyone's like, oh yeah, this anthropologist guy committed the murder and then he actually turned out to be the murderer? This never happens. Next, let's look at Gonta's trial. I believe I got this one wrong as well. I think I suspected Kibo the most, but I can't really remember why. But this is the thing with the Gonta, right? I thought he was gonna be an early death. Maybe chapter 1 or 2. This is because he had quite a lot of screen time and even got a scene of himself in chapter 1. Usually when they show off characters in artwork like this, it means they'll die soon. And he's even pretty suspicious in trial 1. After all, he's actually a main suspect. But they kill Gonta off in chapter 4 and still make the artwork relevant to the trial. They show us Gonta as left-handed and then implement this 3 trials later, which is just mind-blowing. Speaking of Gonta, there's also this trend we could see with the first 2 games where the big buff character dies in chapter 4. There's also another trend where the 3rd chapter is the double murder and you have to figure out who the one Blackened is for the 3rd trial. Going into V3, there were 2 types of people. On one hand, there were people that knew V3 was going to follow these trends. On the other hand, there were people that were confident V3 would break these trends. I was the second type of person because I didn't think they would do the same thing 3 times in a row. And that's why it was so shocking for me to see that Korekiyo and Gonta ended up being the culprits. As for V3 Trial 5, I would say it's the most predictable in terms of who the culprit is, and technically it's the only culprit I guessed correctly in V3. So yeah. Now what about the story of V3? Is it as unpredictable as the other 2 games? Now if we take out chapter 6, I would say there aren't actually that many twists in the story overall. And I would say story-wise, it's more predictable than the first 2 games. But this game still had its moments such as Maki's reveal as the ultimate assassin, Kurumi's reveal as the prime minister, Kokichi pretending to be the mastermind. But now let's look at the craziest twist in the series. I know I said I wasn't going to bring up chapter 6, because for a lot of people it is unpredictable in a bad way, but the 53 twist was the biggest mind-blowing moment ever. Like, they hid this twist in plain sight. It was always there. You saw it everywhere, and guess what? The V is a Roman numeral. That's something anyone could think of, but for some reason it just never clicks. And I think a lot of people dismissed the V entirely because they had to differentiate the title from the anime, which is actually Danganronpa 3. So yeah, that does it for this video. Did you guys find V3 to be the most unpredictable game? Or was it actually the most predictable? Comment it down below, and for the next video, I can inform you that I'm going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be looking at Danganronpa Ultra Despair Girls, because by the time this video goes up, I'll have finished playing it, so I will share my thoughts on that game, and I'll see you all next time.